The Unpaid Ledger, Episode 11, The Name. Chapter 1, Delivery. The Taurus didn't start on the first try. Never did. Not anymore. You had to turn the key, wait for the engine to think about it, then turn it again while the starter motor made a sound like a man clearing his throat before a speech he didn't want to give. Second try. The engine caught. The dashboard rattled once and settled into its usual hum, which was less a hum and more a negotiation between moving parts that had stopped being on speaking terms somewhere around 160,000 miles. 1998 Ford Taurus. Black, originally. Now it was the color of a chalkboard that had been erased too many times. The paint had given up on the roof and hood first, fading to a dusty charcoal that no amount of washing would fix. Not that I washed it. Dent in the rear quarter panel from a parking garage in Hartford 3 years ago. Crack in the windshield that had been spreading at roughly an inch a month since November. Passenger seat locked 2 inches too far back because something had broken in the track mechanism and I'd never gotten around to fixing it. Nobody else sat there. Nobody alive anyway. Not for a long time. Not since Eddie. Eddie materialized in his usual spot, the broken seat. He didn't need to sit, strictly speaking. Didn't need to open the door either. But 7 years of being dead hadn't killed the habits of being alive, and there was something about the Taurus that made him act more human. Maybe it was the only space that was genuinely ours. "You look terrible," Eddie said, settling into the broken seat like he'd been sitting there all night. "Didn't sleep?" I adjusted the rearview mirror, though there was nothing behind us worth seeing. "I know. I was there." He crossed his arms and watched the dashboard lights flicker through their startup sequence. I pulled out of the parking spot behind my building. 6:40 in the morning, February in Ashford. The sky looked like someone had stretched a dirty sheet across the city and called it weather. My phone had buzzed at 4 a.m. Leland's number. Not the name she'd promised. Instructions. A storage facility on the industrial east side, Unit 114. Key taped behind the fire extinguisher in the hallway outside. Precise. Clinical. The kind of directions you give when you've scouted a location personally and don't trust the details to chance. I hadn't gone immediately. Sat with it for 2 hours. Stared at the ceiling. Let Eddie pace around the apartment pretending he wasn't watching me. Now, I was going. Because the alternative was sitting still, and sitting still had never been something I was good at. "Could be a trap," Eddie said, watching the street slide past. "Could be." I kept my eyes on the road, both hands on the wheel. "Could be another test." He leaned back in the broken seat. "She's been running those for 7 years." "Could be that too." I turned the heater dial, though it hadn't worked right since October. "Could be exactly what she said it would be." Eddie said it quietly, watching a delivery truck pull out of a loading dock ahead of us. I turned onto industrial, old warehouses. Loading docks with weeds growing through the concrete. The part of Ashford that had been dying since the 80s and had finally given up, pretending otherwise. "That's the one that worries me," I said, and neither of us spoke again until I turned into the lot. The storage facility was called Easy Lock, which was the kind of name that inspired exactly zero confidence. Chain link fence, keypad entry, rows of orange roll-up doors stretching back into the lot. I punched in the code Leland had included and drove through. Unit 114 was in the back row. I parked. Sat for a moment with the engine running. The radio was tuned to the dead station, the one that hadn't picked up a broadcast signal in years, but sometimes picked up other things. Right now, nothing. Static so faint, it was almost silence. "Waiting for something?" Eddie asked, his reflection not quite visible in the windshield. Quiet. I cut the engine and sat listening to the lot. Wind against chain link. Nothing else. I got out. Found the fire extinguisher in the hallway between units. The key was there, exactly where she'd said. Small. Silver. Attached to a plain metal ring with no label. The unit was 10 by 10. Concrete floor, metal walls, overhead bulb that buzzed when I pulled the chain. Empty, except for a single item sitting on the floor in the center of the space, like it had been staged for a photograph. A bureau file folder. Standard issue. Gray cardstock, red stripe along the spine indicating classified access level. The kind of folder that lived in locked drawers and locked rooms in a building where everyone had clearances and nobody had the full picture. I picked it up, felt the weight. More than a few pages. Opened it. The cardstock was stiff and cold under my fingers. The name on the first page was Arthur Rhodes, Senior Auditor, Bureau of Equilibrium, Ashford Regional Office, 23 years of service. Below that, in the precise handwriting of someone who documented everything, a case number, an authorization code, and the words Spatial Assessor Active. I stood there in the storage unit with the buzzing light and the concrete floor and the file in my hands and felt the last 7 years rearrange themselves. Of course it was Rhodes. The name sat on the page like it had always been there, waiting for someone to read it. The petty bureaucrat, the wounded administrator who filed complaints and pushed audits and sat across from me in his office with his coffee and his carefully maintained expression of professional displeasure. The man who'd buried Derek. The man who'd expedited Miriam's destruction. I'd thought of him as an obstacle, a wall to work around. A middle manager drunk on whatever small authority the Bureau gave him. Wrong. All of it wrong. Every assumption I'd made about him filed in the wrong drawer. Rhodes wasn't the wall. He was the foundation. The whole operation was built on him, and I'd been standing on it the entire time. Eddie was beside me, looking at the file over my shoulder, quiet for a long time. He offered me coffee, Eddie said. Sat in his office, looked right through me like I wasn't there, and offered me coffee. He knew what you were. He's known what I am for years. And he just sat there. Eddie's voice went flat. The bitter edge sharpened into something colder. 5 adjusters dead. A 9-year-old kid. And he sat there in his little office with his little coffee and his little complaints, like he was running a department instead of a slaughterhouse. I closed the file, tucked it inside my jacket, killed the light, locked the unit, and walked back to the Taurus. Got in. Eddie was already in the passenger seat. April's, I said, pulling the door shut and reaching for the ignition. Yeah. Eddie was already looking ahead, his jaw set, his hands flat on his knees. I drove. The radio crackled once, brief and sharp, like someone had tapped a microphone. Then silence again. Eddie tilted his head toward it, just slightly, the way you'd turn toward a sound you weren't sure you'd heard. Then he looked away. I noticed, filed it, kept driving. The streets were empty at this hour, and the Taurus had them to itself. Chapter 2. The Architect. April's apartment was on the south side, 4th floor of a converted warehouse, freight elevator that groaned like it was doing you a personal favor. She'd been up since my text at 5 a.m. 3 monitors on her desk, all active. Folders in labeled boxes on the floor. Research lived here, and it had been busy. Derek was already there, back to the wall by the door, arms crossed. He'd gotten my text too. Rhodes? I dropped the file on April's desk. Let the name fill the room. Derek didn't move, didn't react, just watched me with eyes that had already processed the information and moved on to what came next. April picked up the file, opened it, started reading. Her face did the thing it did when data confirmed a hypothesis she hadn't wanted to be right about. Tied around the eyes. Jaw set. Cross-reference it. I tapped the folder. Against Miriam's thumb drive. The authorization codes, the placement records, all of it. Already pulling them up. Her fingers were moving across the keyboard. Give me 20 minutes. It took 15. She was thorough, but the data wasn't subtle. Rhodes hadn't been subtle. He'd been invisible, which was different. Once you knew where to look, the architecture was clear. Authorization codes match, April said, pulling her chair back so we could see the screens. Every one of the 23 placements runs through the special assessor credentials. Credentials reactivated 9 years ago. Rhodes transferred to Ashford 10 months before that. He positioned himself, Derek said. First word since I'd arrived. 3 words. All he needed. Built the whole thing from inside. April scrolled through data. First 2 years, he's establishing himself. Good reviews. Solid casework. Building trust. Then year 3, the special assessor codes activate, and the off-books placements start. Small ones first. testing what the credentials could authorize without triggering review. And nobody noticed. I leaned back against April's bookshelf. The position was designed not to be noticed. Emergency oversight, no supervisor review. She pulled up another screen. But here's what Leland's file adds that the thumb drive didn't have. She opened the folder, flipped past the cover page. Notes, pages of them. Rhodes's handwriting, small and precise, and organized with the kind of care that made my skin crawl. Each placement documented like a medical procedure, clinical language, dispassionate analysis, headings that read like a physician's case file, presenting imbalance, corrective action, projected outcome, follow-up. He's not stealing from the system, April said. He thinks he's treating it. One entry, dated 8 years ago, described a placement on a target identified only by a case number. The language was calm. The word necessary appeared 3 times in 2 paragraphs. The phrase corrective pressure point appeared once. That's Michael Reeves, Derek said, his voice flat and precise as a closing door. Everyone stopped. April's fingers hovered above the keyboard. I straightened against the bookshelf. Case number matches, April said quietly. I can confirm from the thumb drive. Derek walked to the desk, picked up the page. Read it. His face didn't change. Nothing broke. Nothing cracked. He just read it, top to bottom, then set it down. Walked to the window. Stood there with his back to us, looking out at the south side of Ashford. The room went quiet. Outside, the freight elevator groaned somewhere in the shaft, carrying no one. April kept scrolling through the notes. After a moment, she stopped. Sam, look at this. Another entry. This one more recent. A placement authorized 6 months before Miriam started her investigation. The target was an adjuster named Falk, based in the Western District. The notes described a persistent operational deviation. Falk had been taking unauthorized cases, same as Harlan Beck years earlier. Rhodes's recommended action: placement of a cardiac debt on Falk's daughter, age 14. The entry noted, in that same clinical hand, that secondary targets with familial bonds produce more reliable behavioral correction than direct action. He'd learned from Michael Reeves, refined the approach, made it more efficient. He's getting better at it, April said. Her voice was very controlled. The early placements are blunt. The recent ones are surgical. I looked at the notes. 23 placements over 8 years. 5 dead adjusters. The ones who survived fell in line. And Rhodes documented everyone like a doctor, tracking treatment outcomes, adjusting dosage, noting what worked and what didn't. The last page of the file had a summary table: names, dates, outcomes, a column labeled compliance, achieved with checkmarks. All but 2 had checkmarks. The 2 that didn't had a different notation: terminated. Not the adjuster's compliance, their lives. 2 checkmarks that meant 2 people who'd stopped breathing. In Rhodes's notes, Michael Reeves was a corrective pressure point, 9 years old. The placement was designed to force an adjuster named Harlan Beck back into compliance. Beck had been freelancing, taking cases Rhodes hadn't authorized, disrupting the pattern Rhodes was building. When a child's life wasn't enough to bring Beck in line, Derek was next. Derek refused, so Rhodes buried him, destroyed his bureau career, classified his personnel file, made him disappear. Not out of spite. That was the part that turned my stomach. Rhodes hadn't done it out of anger or malice or even self-preservation. He'd done it because Derek was a variable that didn't fit the model, and the model was more important than the man. Derek turned around. His face was the same, controlled, settled. The kind of calm that wasn't calm at all, but something heavier. What's the play? He said, his hands at his sides, his weight settled evenly on both feet. Behind his eyes, something had been decided. I'd seen that look before in people who'd stopped weighing options and started building plans. We verify everything, I said. Build the case. Find someone who can act on it without Rhodes intercepting. Who? April asked. He has root access. Any investigation that goes through bureau channels, he'll see it. Then we go around the bureau. I pushed off the bookshelf and stood in the center of the room. With what? Stolen files and the word of a woman who spent 7 years manipulating you? April wasn't being cruel. She was being accurate. We need someone with independent authority who Rhodes can't touch. Is there anyone like that? I looked at April, then at the monitors behind her. I'm working on it. She turned back to her monitors. Give me time. Derek hadn't moved from the window. How much time do we have? Before what? I asked, though I already knew what he was going to say. I asked it anyway. Before he finds out we know. Derek said it from the window, his back still to us, his reflection caught in the glass. Chapter 3. Saltwater. The freight elevator groaned behind me as it closed. 4 flights of concrete stairs, my footsteps echoing off cinder block, and then the loading dock. Cold air hit my face. February. The parking lot was empty, except for the Taurus, sitting under a streetlight that turned its faded paint the color of a bruise. I left April working the problem. Derek stayed, which surprised me. He pulled up a chair next to her desk and started reading through Rhodes's notes 1 page at a time. And something about the way he settled in told me he wasn't leaving until he'd read every word. Eddie was in the passenger seat before I'd opened the driver's door. So, he said, turning to face me as I dropped into the seat. Rhodes. Rhodes. I pulled the door shut and stared through the windshield at the loading dock. The man who sat in his office and talked about protocol violations while authorizing the murder of a 9-year-old boy. Corrective pressure point. The words tasted like rust. That's what he called it. I know what he called it. Eddie's form flickered at the edges. I was reading over your shoulder. I started the car, pulled out. Didn't have a destination, just needed to drive. The Taurus rattled through second gear the way it always did, like something under the hood was having second thoughts. We were on Riverside Drive, heading east along the water, when Eddie went still. Not his normal kind of still. This was a man who'd been struck by something invisible, his eyes unfocused. His form went translucent for half a second, the dashboard visible through his chest, then snapped back solid. His hands gripped the edge of the broken seat. Eddie. I took my foot off the gas and let the Taurus coast. I'm fine. He held up one hand, palm out, though the gesture was undercut by the fact that I could see the glove box through his fingers. You're not fine. You just went see-through. I gripped the wheel tighter. I do that. He pulled his hand back and gripped the edge of the seat again. Not like that. I was already scanning the shoulder for a place to pull over. He looked at me, then away, out the window, at the river sliding past. Gray water, gray sky. Something's happening, he said, in the gray space. I pulled over, parked on the shoulder with the engine idling and the river 20 feet away on the other side of a rusted guardrail. Waited. Eddie took his time. Not because he was being dramatic, because he was trying to find words for something that didn't have them. It started after Elmwood, the dispersal. At first I thought it was residual, like an echo from the entity material. But it's not an echo. He stopped, started again. You know how sometimes you're in a room and you feel someone walk in behind you? Before you hear them, before you see them, you just feel the air change. Yeah, I shifted in the seat to face him and waited for the rest. That, except the room is the gray space, and it isn't one person. It's a lot of someones, and they've been there the whole time. How long have you been feeling this? I watched his face for the flicker again. 3 days. Small impressions at first, a flash of something. The taste of salt water. Smoke from a fire that hasn't burned in 100 years. He held up his hands, studied them, translucent at the fingertips. They come in waves. 2 seconds, 3, then they're gone. Costs? I leaned forward, forearms on the steering wheel, eyes on the river. Old ones, the oldest I've ever felt. Costs that were never placed, never balanced. They just drifted. Found the tier the same way water finds a crack in a foundation. Seeped in, settled. He paused. Some are almost nothing, a flash of color. But others are vivid, Sam. Yesterday I tasted salt water for 3 full seconds. not a memory of it. The actual taste on a tongue I don't have, from an ocean I've never seen. And underneath it, a loss so specific I could have drawn you a picture. Someone lost someone near water a long time ago. The grief was so old it didn't even feel like grief anymore, more like weather. They were already awake, I said. Not a question. For decades, centuries, some of them, drifting in the dark. But the space was raw, unfinished, like a cave system with no light. Nothing could find anything else. What changed? I turned the heater down. The fan was rattling, and I wanted to hear him clearly. He looked at me. You did. Every time you interact with the tear, push something through it, or acknowledge what it is, the space gets more navigable, more structured. And now the things that have been drifting in the dark can find each other. Can find you. I said it before he did, watching his face. Can find the door. He almost smiled. Didn't? 7 years, I've been sitting in a dark room thinking I was alone. Turns out the room was full. I just couldn't see the other chairs. The radio spiked. Sharp. Metallic. A sound like a tuning fork struck against something that wasn't metal. Eddie flinched. That wasn't me, he said, his eyes fixed on the radio dial. The sound held for 2 seconds. 3. Then it faded, and the radio dropped back to its baseline hum. But in those 3 seconds, I'd felt it. The ledger. Close. Closer than it should have been, pressing against the inside of the car like air pressure before a storm. Eddie's form had gone translucent again. When he solidified, his eyes were wrong. Deep. Like looking down a well that went further than it had any right to. There's something else, he said. Yesterday, while you were at April's going through Miriam's files, I reached toward one of them, deliberately. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, kept my eyes on the river. One of the closer presences, old grief, a cost that feels like it has to do with a fire, a long time ago. I opened myself to it, let it see me. He paused. Something reached back. What did it feel like? I turned in the seat to look at him. Long pause. A barge moved upriver, slow and heavy. Its wake lapped against the embankment. Like being remembered by someone I've never met. I sat with that. The river moved past, slow and dark. After I pulled back, the impressions got clearer. Not just from that one. From all of them. Like making contact opened a channel to the rest. He paused. I can describe one. Not the fire one. A different one. Older. Go ahead. I cut the heater entirely. The fan died, and the car went quiet except for the idle. A woman's hands on a wooden table. Flour dusted. Strong. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at something I couldn't see. I don't know her name. Don't know when she lived. But I know the weight of what she lost. Something the ledger should have balanced and didn't. The cost drifted. Found the tear. Settled in the gray space like a seed in soil. And over decades, it grew roots. Not into a person, into a pattern. A shape that remembered what it used to be attached to. The engine idled. The guardrail ticked in the wind. A faint metallic sound that came and went. How many are there? Outside, a gull banked low over the river and disappeared downstream. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Most are deep, far from the surface. But they're moving toward the part of the gray space that's healed enough to hold them. He said it without ego, which is near me because I'm the first thing the wound learned to hold. Leland said the entities gathering there don't know the difference between a weapon and a wound. Leland's measuring the gray space from the outside with instruments that read ledger activity. Flat. Certain. That's like understanding an ocean by measuring the height of the waves. A truck passed on Riverside, close enough to rock the Taurus in its wake. Eddie waited for the sound to fade. It's not a room, Sam. The gray space. That's what I thought. And I was wrong. What is it? I watched the barge's wake reach the guardrail and break against the concrete below. An ocean. He said it flat, the way you'd say something too large for emphasis. The tear, is the shore. The room I've been living in is the beach. Beyond that, it goes down and out, and it's full of things that have been collecting since before either of us were born. Costs, grief, unbalanced debts. The ledger's lost inventory. They accumulate in the spaces between. I shifted in the driver's seat. The vinyl creaked. How far does it go? The guardrail ticked again, and somewhere upriver a horn sounded. I reached out as far as I could. No bottom, no edges. He paused. It might not have edges. And they know about the door. I looked at Eddie's reflection in the windshield, layered over the river beyond it. They felt it opening. Every time you interact with the tier, it's like a lighthouse coming on. He looked at me. They can't come through. They're patterns, not people. But they want to be known. The way a debt wants to be settled. Not desire. Gravity. And you're standing in the doorway. I said it flat. I've been standing in the doorway for 7 years. I just didn't know the hallway was full. I started the car. Let the engine settle. The radio faded to its baseline. We deal with roads first, I said, checking the mirror and pulling off the shoulder. Agreed. Eddie straightened in the broken seat and turned to face the road ahead. Then we figure out what to do about an ocean full of old grief that's decided you're the welcome mat. Eloquent as always. Eddie shook his head, but the corner of his mouth twitched. I pulled off the shoulder and headed back into the city. Eddie watched the buildings pass. Solid. Present. But every few minutes, he'd tilt his head slightly, listening to something I couldn't hear. Chapter 4. Birch Street. The silver Honda was parked on Birch, 2 blocks east of my building, right where Derek said it would be. I didn't drive past, not directly. I took Harper 1 block south, turned east on Milliken, and came up behind it from a direction that wouldn't put my windshield in its mirrors. Parked the Taurus in the loading zone behind the laundromat on the corner. Cut the engine. The Honda was 50 yards ahead, facing north on Birch. Tinted windows. Clean. Newer model than anything you'd see parked on this block for long. A parking permit sticker, half peeled, on the lower left windshield. The rental plates were visible from here, white characters on a dark background. Road grime had settled on the trunk and rear bumper. Not overnight. Days. Stay or go? Eddie asked, already leaning toward the door he didn't need to open. Go. Get close. Tell me what you see. I settled back in the seat and kept my eyes on the Honda's mirrors. Eddie dissolved out of the passenger seat and reappeared on the sidewalk. He walked like a person who had somewhere to be, which was a trick, because most ghosts moved like they were browsing. 7 years of practice had made Eddie convincing. A woman walking a dog looked right through him. That was the thing about Eddie. People didn't notice him unless he wanted them to. Something about the gray space made him slip between the places where eyes focused. I waited, watched him cross Harper and head north on Birch, hands in pockets that weren't technically pockets on a jacket that wasn't technically a jacket. He passed the Honda on the driver's side, kept walking, didn't slow, didn't look. Went another half block, stopped at a bus shelter, stood there for a minute like a man checking a schedule that didn't exist. Then he crossed the street and walked back south on the far sidewalk, taking his time, looking at the Honda from every angle the street geometry allowed. 4 minutes. He was back in the passenger seat, solid and settled. One person, Eddie said. Driver's seat. Male, I think. 40-something. Not bureau. Wrong clothes, wrong posture. Bureau surveillance sits like they're on the clock. This guy's sitting like he's been there for a while, and he's used to it. Comfortable. Whatever he's doing, he's done it before. Military? I kept my voice low, out of habit, though nobody outside the car could hear us. Maybe. Or private, like Harmon Kessler, but different outfit. He's got a coffee thermos in the cup holder and a notebook on the passenger seat. Serious equipment. Eddie paused. But not Leland's. The car's got no ledger residue on it at all. None. Leland's vehicles would carry some. Her people work around ledger equipment all day. It clings like cigarette smoke. That was interesting. Leland's operation left traces the way a bakery leaves the smell of bread. If this car was clean, it wasn't connected to her network. Whoever was sitting in that Honda lived in the normal world. No ledger involvement. No supernatural angle. Just a man with a notebook and a thermos and a lot of patience. What's he watching? I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the steering wheel. Eddie hesitated. That's the thing, Sam. I walked both sides of the street. His sightlines don't point at your building. They point past it. East. East of my building is the alley and then Crescent. And on Crescent is the back entrance to the bureau field office. I looked at Eddie. Eddie looked at me. Neither of us said anything for a 3 count. He's not watching us, I said, sitting back in the seat. He's watching the bureau. Eddie said it with the certainty of a man who'd walked the angles himself. We sat with that. The Taurus ticked as the engine cooled. A delivery truck rumbled past on Harper, close enough to rock us in its wake. Someone else was running surveillance on the bureau. Someone unconnected to Leland, unconnected to us, with professional-grade equipment and the patience to sit on a residential block for days. Someone who'd been there long enough to see me come and go, but who hadn't shown any interest in following me. That last part was what stuck. If you're watching a building and a known associate of a bureau target walks in and out of the adjacent apartment 3 times a day, you note it. You photograph it. You follow up. Unless the associate isn't what you're interested in, unless your operation is focused on something specific inside that bureau office, and everyone outside it is background noise. Miriam? I asked, though the question didn't fit even as I said it. Miriam doesn't have money for a rental car. She went to ground with a thumb drive and whatever cash she had in her pocket. Then who? I tapped my thumb against the steering wheel. Eddie shook his head. I don't know. But whoever it is, they're here for roads, not for us. I started the Taurus. The engine caught on the second try, grudgingly, and I backed out of the loading zone. Took Harper west toward home. The rearview mirror showed the Honda, still parked, still watching, still pointed at a bureau field office that had no idea it was being studied from both sides. Could be a coincidence, Eddie said, in a tone that communicated exactly how much he believed in coincidences. Could be an ally we don't know about. I turned the wheel and merged onto the westbound lane. Could be someone worse than Rhodes. Eddie watched the Honda shrink in the side mirror. Could be. I turned onto my street. Let's find out. Chapter 5. The Cage. The Taurus was still warm from the drive back. I sat behind my building with the engine ticking down and the heater pushing stale air through vents that hadn't been cleaned since the car was new, and I called Derek. Told him about the Honda's sightlines. Not watching you. Derek's voice was flat. Processing. Watching the field office. That's what Eddie reads. I leaned back and watched a pigeon pick its way across the parking lot. No ledger residue on the vehicle? Derek asked, and I could hear him writing something down. Clean? I said it the way you'd close a door. Nothing more to add. Silence. Then, I'll run a second pass on the plates. Dig deeper into the rental agency. If someone's surveilling the bureau independently, there might be a paper trail. Derek? I gripped the steering wheel. Whatever you're planning with, Rhodes. Not yet. More silence. Hard-edged. I could hear him breathing on the other end, measuring what to say. The chalk signal is out, he said finally. Marcus confirmed. If Miriam checks the backup location in the next 48 hours, she'll know. Good. I stared through the windshield at the back wall of my building, where the bricks were darkened with old water stains. April's got a lead on someone outside Rhodes' chain. Won't name them. Wants to verify. Good. I shifted the phone to my other ear and waited for what was coming next. Sam? His voice changed. Stripped down. I read every page of that file. Every note. Every time he wrote necessary, like he was balancing a budget instead of ending a life. The Taurus shuddered through an idle dip. Something under the hood catching and releasing. Michael Reeves was 9 years old, and Rhodes filed him under corrective action and moved on to the next line item. I know. I closed my eyes and pressed my head back against the headrest. 8 years I've been patient. Derek's voice was low, controlled, stripped down to the studs. I know that too. I opened my eyes and watched the pigeon take off from the asphalt. Not much longer. He let the words sit for a beat. Then the line went dead. He hung up. The phone screen went dark in my hand, and I set it on the dash. I sat in the Taurus, parked behind my building, and thought about Arthur Rhodes. Not the Rhodes I'd met. Not the offended bureaucrat in the tidy office who'd offered me coffee and warned me to walk away. That had been the mask. The real Rhodes was the man in those notes. The one who wrote corrective pressure point in neat handwriting next to a 9-year-old boy's case number and went home without a tremor. The one who filed Derek Wade under non-compliant variable and erased his career the way you'd delete a spreadsheet row. That Rhodes was still sitting in his office right now, still drinking his coffee, still managing his system. Somewhere in the architecture of codes and authorizations he'd built over 9 years were the mechanisms he'd used to destroy Miriam Tate if she surfaced. Not out of malice, out of the model's requirements. And Derek knew it, had read every page, had sat with it the way a man sits with a loaded weapon, quietly deciding what to do with it. I called Leland's number. It rang twice, and then the line opened to silence before she spoke. Samuel? Leland's voice came through flat and precise, as if she'd been expecting the call. Rhodes checks out. I kept my voice neutral, just delivering the information. I know, Leland said, the 2 words carrying the weight of 9 years of certainty. The silver Honda isn't watching me. It's watching the bureau field office. A longer pause this time, genuine, not performed. That's new information, Leland said. New to you too? I watched a second pigeon land on the hood of the Taurus. I told you I had theories about the vehicle. I may have been wrong about all of them. Her voice shifted. Colder, more precise. Someone else is interested in the Bureau's Ashford operations. Someone with resources. That changes the calculus. Any idea who? I brushed the pigeon off the hood by tapping the windshield from inside. No, and that concerns me, Samuel. I've spent 9 years mapping every player connected to this office. Bureau personnel, contractors, oversight channels, funding sources. If someone is running surveillance that I didn't anticipate, they're either very new or very good at hiding. Or you're not as thorough as you think. I let the words land without softening them. Unlikely, but possible. She paused again. Be careful with Rhodes. Arthur Rhodes does not doubt. Not once in 23 years. He documents every death with the precision of a surgeon and sleeps 8 hours. That kind of certainty doesn't retreat. When it's cornered, it eliminates the threat and calls it maintenance. You've been working adjacent to him for 9 years. You didn't stop him. He was useful. Same tone she'd used about Eddie. His placements kept the Bureau looking elsewhere. We had an arrangement. And now? I leaned forward, elbows on the steering wheel, watching the empty lot. Now he's a liability. If he discovers what the gray space is becoming, he won't study it. He'll try to cauterize it. She paused. That's what zealots do with things they can't control. She hung up. Conversations with Leland ended when Leland decided they ended. Eddie was watching me from the passenger seat. She didn't know about the Honda's sightlines. No. I set the phone down on the center console and left it there. First time we've told her something she didn't already know. Yeah. I turned to look at him, and he was almost grinning. Felt good, didn't it? Eddie leaned back in the broken seat, arms crossed. Little bit. I allowed myself half a smile, then killed it and looked back at the windshield. Eddie almost smiled, the bitter kind. So, Rhodes is a zealot who sleeps well. Leland's a scientist who doesn't know who's watching our operation. Derek's a bomb with a lit fuse. Miriam's a ghost. And there's someone in a Honda watching the Bureau for reasons nobody can explain. He ticked them off on fingers that were slightly translucent in the afternoon light. Am I missing anything? The ocean full of dead grief that's been trying to talk to you. Right. That too. He looked out the window. It's a hell of a Tuesday, Sam. I pulled out of the parking spot. The Taurus protested second gear, same as always. The dashboard rattle picked up a new harmonic for half a block, and then settled back into its usual complaint. We needed to get the team together. All of it. Not phone calls, not texts through compromised channels. Everyone in one room, looking at each other, working the problem out loud. Because the problems were multiplying faster than the solutions, and somewhere between Rhodes and the Honda and the gray space, something was going to break. I wanted to be the one who chose which thing and when. The meeting, Eddie said, reading my mind the way he'd been doing for 7 years. Tonight? Tonight. I turned the wheel and headed for the south side of the city, where the answers were, or at least the people who might find them. Chapter 6. Wait. My apartment smelled like stale coffee and the ozone hum of April's laptop fans. She'd been set up at the kitchen counter for 20 minutes by the time everyone arrived, 3 monitors replaced by 1 screen, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd found what she was looking for. Derek by the door. Marcus in the one good chair, vest buttoned, tea cooling on the side table. Eddie by the window. External Oversight Board, April said, skipping the preamble. Founded in the Bureau's original charter, independent of the administrative chain. 3 members appointed, authority to suspend any officer pending investigation, including special assessor credentials. Never been used, Marcus said, lifting his teacup and holding it just below his chin. Once, 1987. A regional director in Philadelphia was skimming placement fees. The board convened, suspended his access in 48 hours. April pulled up a document on her laptop. 2 of the 3 original members are dead. The 3rd is alive. And the charter requires a minimum of 1 sitting member to act. 1 person, Derek said from his spot by the door, his arms still crossed. 1 person with the legal authority to freeze roads and order an independent audit. April paused. I verified her through public records and professional registrations. Nothing that touches bureau systems. Her name is Judge Eleanor Voss. Retired federal bench, 73 years old, lives in Briarfield. She hasn't been contacted about bureau business in 11 years. Will she act? I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter across from April's screen. She took the appointment for a reason. And from what I can find, she's not the type to ignore evidence of a 23 placement, 5-body operation running under her oversight. April closed the laptop. I can have a briefing package ready in 2 days. Everything from Miriam's files, cross-referenced against Leland's folder, organized so a federal judge can follow the chain. Miriam, Marcus said. The chalk signal is placed. Our mutual friend knows where to look. If she checks in the next day or 2, she'll have the name and a warning to stay deep. He set down his tea. Miriam Tate has survived 20 years in the Bureau by being smarter than the people trying to catch her. She'll check. I'll handle Rhodes, Derek said. Map his movements, schedule, contacts. If he's meeting people, those meetings leave patterns. Map his movements. I held his look. That's it. That's it. He held my look right back, his hands loose at his sides, his weight balanced. He said the right words. His eyes said something else entirely. There's something else, I said. I told them about the Honda, the sightlines, the clean vehicle, an unknown party watching the Bureau field office. Marcus's teacup stopped halfway to his mouth. Someone else is in play. Someone with resources and patience who isn't connected to Leland. Could be helpful, April said. If they're investigating the Bureau independently, could be anything, Derek cut in. Helpful, hostile, federal. We don't move on it until we know. Mr. Wade is correct. Marcus set his cup down carefully. In my experience, unknown players at the table change the rules of every game already in progress. We proceed as planned, but we watch our backs more carefully than we watch the road ahead. I'll add the Honda to my surveillance map, Derek said. Run the plates deeper. If they're renting locally, there's a credit card. If there's a credit card, there's a name. He was right. Everyone knew he was right. But the room was heavier for it. People left. Marcus first, with a nod and a hand on my shoulder. April next, laptop bag over her shoulder, already composing the briefing package in her head. Derek last. He stopped at the door. His hand rested on the frame. Sam? Derek turned back to face me, and the hallway light caught the side of his jaw. Yeah. I was still leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching him. He looked at me, 8 years behind his eyes, and something new in front of them. Not rage. Thank you for the file. He said it simply, the way you'd state a fact that didn't need decoration. Don't thank me. Thank the woman who killed your career and my best friend. I'm not thanking her. He opened the door. I'm thanking you for trusting me with it. He left. The apartment was quiet. The ozone hum of April's absent laptop still hung in the air, fading. I grabbed my keys, went downstairs, got in the Taurus, didn't start it. Just sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel and the cracked windshield framing a parking lot that had never looked like much. Eddie materialized in the passenger seat. His spot, the broken seat. The radio was on. Low. The dead station. Underneath the static, the frequency. Clearer tonight. Layers of sound folded on top of each other. Almost a chord. Almost something you could name. Eddie's form flickered, doubled. One Eddie here in the Taurus, one somewhere else, somewhere deeper, then solid again. They know the door's opening, he said quietly. The old costs, the patterns. They've been waiting a long time. What do they want? I turned to face him, my hand still resting on the key in the ignition. What every debt wants, to be settled. He turned to me, and I'm the closest thing to a settlement they've found in centuries. I reached for the ignition. The radio shifted, and my hand stopped. Not louder, different. The cord broke apart, the layers separating, and underneath them something that hadn't been there before. A sound, thin, distant, like a recording played through a machine that was never meant to hold it. A voice, faint and far away, buried under layers of static, like a signal from the bottom of something deep. One word, maybe two. Old, faded, in a language I didn't recognize, or maybe not a language at all. Just a shape that sound made when it was trying to be meaning. It had the quality of something that had traveled a very long distance to get here, wearing itself thin along the way, arriving as barely more than an echo of what it had been at the source. Then gone. The radio dropped back to static, normal static. Eddie's hand was on the radio dial. He hadn't moved it. His face was blank. Not the blankness of confusion or fear. The blankness of a man who'd just heard something he'd been expecting without knowing he was expecting it. That wasn't me, he said, pulling his hand back from the dial and staring at it. I know. I kept my hand on the ignition key, but didn't turn it. Sam. He was staring at the radio the way you'd stare at a phone that just rang in an empty house. That came from the other side of the door. The static hummed. The frequency underneath it was steady, like breathing. But different now. Changed. Because for 2 seconds, maybe 3, something in the gray space had found the signal and pushed a word through it. Not to me. Not to the Taurus. Not to the world on this side of the tier. To Eddie. The signal had come for him, and him alone. The ocean had touched the shore, and something in it had answered. I started the car. The engine caught. I pulled out of the lot and drove south through Ashford at night, streetlights bleeding orange through the cracked windshield, the radio playing something that used to be static and was becoming something else. Tomorrow, April would build a case for Judge Voss. Derek would build a surveillance map of roads. Marcus would wait for Miriam's chalk signal. The silver Honda would keep watching the bureau, and Rhodes would keep sitting in his office with his notes and his certainty, and Leland would keep playing whatever game she was playing. And in the gray space, something that had been silent for a very long time had just found its voice. Eddie turned the radio up. Just a little. Then he sat back and left it alone. We kept driving, south through Ashford, into whatever was coming next.